So in 2012, I was in Japan on a family vacation, and I spent a day in prison that I want to tell you about. I didn't do anything wrong, and my family didn't go with me on this part of the vacation, but I'm a criminologist, so I've been interested in prisons, and I was excited to see the Shimane Asahi Rehabilitation Center, because this isn't a typical Japanese prison. This is a new generation prison, forward-leaning, that is kind of intense on technology, public-private partnerships, community partnerships, and very rehabilitation intensive. I was invited by the warden to have lunch, and it would be the same food that the inmates ate, which kind of raised my eyebrows, because over here that would mean a bologna sandwich, mystery meat on white bread. A lot of American prisons spend as little as $1.13 a day per inmate for 3 meals a day for the inmate. In Japan, I had a vegetable stew that was very tasty, rice and barley, and soup. It turns out that the local vegetables, the vegetables were local. They came from farmers nearby. The prison saw itself as a partner with the community, so they bought vegetables to support the local farmers. They also had across the street from the prison, in an annex, a martial arts center for the community to use, a daycare center, and a community meeting room, all as part of being a community partner. The warden commented to me that the nutritious food made sense because inmates found that health problems went away. They had fewer medical costs for inmates because of the good food, and he thought that maybe there should be a nutrition program. Now, this was interesting and unusual. The warden isn't somebody that we would normally think of as being very rehabilitation focused. He had been the warden of maximum security prisons, prisons that held hardcore criminals, including Japanese organized crime figures. But he did believe in rehabilitation. He thought a lot of people could be rehabilitated, and he really wanted to make Shimane Asahi a fully developed rehabilitation center to see where he could take the model. Now, before I say a few more words about the model, I think it's worth talking about American prisons for just a minute. Back in the 1970s, we kind of rejected rehabilitation and started to get tough on crime. We have overcrowding that we dealt with by taking out classrooms and libraries and gyms in prison to make room for more beds. What we developed was a warehouse prison. We store inmates with very few productive activities, and then at the end of their sentence, we ship them back out to the communities, our communities. And it's rather predictable results. They're not necessarily any more pro-social or empathetic. They haven't developed job skills, life skills. When they return to crime, we think the prisons are too comfortable, so we try to make the prison worse. The other bad thing about this is we've built lots of these prisons. Between 1980 and 2000, we built more prisons in the United States than we had in the entire history of the country. And right now, we're at the moment where we're starting to see that decline. We have fewer crappy prisons, and that's better than having more crappy prisons, but this is a low bar, and I think we can do better. Now, the Japanese also have problems with their prisons. I don't want to kind of present this as a utopian prison system, but in 1999, they passed a law that allowed for public and private partnerships to build socially useful infrastructure. They decided that a rehabilitation center was socially useful, a prison not so much. It's still very much a prison in terms of security and rules and other things, but it did have a number of elements. A couple of things that really jump out with the public-private partnerships are that the Japanese rejected the American model of privatization, where a private company, for-profit, traded on Wall Street, builds a prison and gets state inmates. They said, no, the warden of a prison should be a government employee. He should have a staff under him to monitor contract compliance of all the private contractors. And there are a lot of them that deal with security, food service, laundry, any number of other things. The private partners were able to bring a lot of innovation to the prison. They started by replacing strip searches with scanners like you encounter at the airport. In lots of prisons, strip searches mean that the inmates pull down the pants to their ankles, they bend over, they spread their cheeks. This isn't an attractive thing for the inmate to do. It's also bad for the guards. Kind of quality of life and quality of job is really impaired. And the scanner is more secure, and it improves the quality of life for both parties. All of the inmates are also tagged, so the prison knows where they are all the time. In fact, we no longer need to shut down the prison for counts 3 times a day. You lock inmates in their cells, count all of the inmates in the prison to make sure nobody's escaped. Again, this is time-consuming, it's tedious, there's a lot of idle time for the inmates while they're locked in their cell doing the counts. You can actually go further and program into the computer the inmate's schedule. So an inmate will kind of flash in red if he's out of the place where he's supposed to be. Somebody in the control center can click on that, and cameras in the area turn on to the inmate so you can see what they're doing and try to intervene and get them in the right place. They also spent a lot of time on programs, and they enlisted the help of some of the best Japanese victimologists, people who study crime victims and victimization patterns, to say, how could we do better? They also went and toured the world. They did intensive research to figure out what were evidence-based practices that would be effective to try to implement in Japan. They brought people back to Japan and then adapted the ideas to their setting. So what they came up with was a program that all of the inmates go through with understanding victims and victim viewpoints. For inmates who need it, there are drug and alcohol programs. For inmates who have done violent crimes, there's programs to deal with their violence, understanding why they did it, triggers, and what they can do about it. There are parenting classes for those who need them, as well as math and language classes for people who have basic deficits. They also do a lot with occupational training. And before you go into an occupational training class, there is a number of foundation skills that the Japanese think you need. So this is basic business skills, commercial transactions, bookkeeping, computer skills, and safety and sanitation. And then after that, they place you into one of the programs. And the programs were developed with local businesses and universities and other things with the requirement that they be relevant for the current job market. So some of the inmates do hairdressing or become barbers. The warden commented that this wasn't for violent inmates. Inmates can learn how to be medical clerks and learn how to do medical office work. There's a personal care assistant, which is particularly in Japan, needed in Japan because of the number of aging people there. They have a commercial scale bakery where they teach inmates how to bake, and they bake all of the food that they need for all of the baked goods that they need for the prison there. There's computers and information processing. They have heavy construction classes, a big plexiglass-fronted classroom outside with a bulldozer and a gravel pit where inmates can learn how to operate machinery. They have classes on digital content editing, editing HD video, boosting audio signals, things like that. A number of inmates are engaged in Braille translation, giving something back to the community, learning about people who have some challenges in life, hopefully developing empathy through that. The ones who successfully complete Braille can enroll in classes to train seeing eye dogs, because there's a big shortage in Japan of seeing eye dogs to help out people who are blind. They have a horse therapy program, which doesn't involve training horses or breaking them, but establishing a relationship with the horse. Those of you who have seen the Horse Whisperer movies and documentaries kind of have a sense of this. In the last 2 weeks of their stay, inmates can volunteer to fix bicycles to send off to developing countries. These are used by medical practitioners to get out to people who can't get into villages, to see them, especially women who are pregnant and other folks who can't travel easily. Since the earthquake in Japan, they've kind of shipped more bicycles up north to some of the areas that are most affected. There's a number of inmates as well that have mental and emotional problems. While I was there, they had the inmates working on masks and beaded costumes for a local festival. They thought that basically doing something, having the inmates do something with their hands kept them calm. They learned about the local culture, and they were also able to build some self-esteem by giving something back. There was also therapeutic gardens for some of the mentally disturbed inmates. All of this is kind of unusual. I would say it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, but Alice was the sane one in a crazy world, and I actually have a lot of respect for what they did, so I don't want to kind of push that analogy too far. I think we need to kind of respect innovation, taking something that all of us take for granted, that gets neglected, and trying to do something with it. Go around the world, study, research, and come up with something different and out of the box. That doesn't mean we need to grab it and adopt it. Although I think it's important to note that a lot of the ideas that they're implementing are kind of Western ideas, based on Western literature and practices that they've adopted over there. So if we're interested in some of this, we can go back to our own literature and just take it seriously. What I do think this points to is the problems with our current prison and the need to be more innovative, to start thinking about a prison for the next 20 years or 50 years, something different than what we are doing. There's a study by a University of Chicago group, a working group on economics and crime, that suggested that we could go back to 1984 levels of incarceration and really not do much to endanger public safety. And certainly if they've got that right, that suggests that we could close an awful lot of prisons, and I think that that would be a good step. But what I'd like to suggest to you is that in doing that, we leave space for one model, socially useful rehabilitation center. What we need to start doing now, though, is advocating for something like that and starting to imagine what it would look like. Thank you very much.